In the last episode, we walked through what working on an Astro site actually looks like, from editing content to building, deploying, and seeing a page live. This episode is about deciding when that workflow is actually worth the trade-offs. If you've built sites with WordPress for a while, this question probably feels familiar. I get how this works, but would I actually want this for the kinds of projects that I build? And that's the right question. WordPress bundles content, rendering, and updates into a single system. That makes some things very easy, especially early on, and other things increasingly complex over time. Astro doesn't replace that WordPress-like bundle. It pulls the responsibilities apart. Neither approach is inherently better. They just create very different trade-offs. And this episode is about evaluating those trade-offs honestly. There are a few places where Astro tends to fit well. Astro often makes sense for content-heavy marketing and informational sites. Projects where structure and consistency matter more than constant in-place updates. Teams that are already comfortable with a build and deploy workflow. Sites where predictability, performance, and accessibility hygiene matter more than runtime flexibility. And situations where long-term maintainability outweigh short-term convenience. If several of those sound familiar, Astro might feel reasonable. It's just as important to be explicit about when Astro is usually not a good idea. Sites that require frequent on-site content changes throughout the day. Teams without a deployment process or without tolerance for builds. Projects where clients expect to log in and edit everything directly. Highly dynamic app-like experiences. And situations where WordPress's runtime flexibility is actually an advantage. None of this is a failure. Often it just means that WordPress still works, and that's a perfectly valid outcome. A lot of platform comparisons get stuck on features. But the differences that actually matter tend to look more like this: build friction versus runtime complexity, editorial immediacy versus architectural clarity, explicit systems versus hidden magic, and fewer moving parts at runtime versus more steps up front. Astro doesn't eliminate the complexity. It shifts where the complexity lives. Let's talk about editing content, because this is where tension shows up quickly. Now, Markdown is not friendly for most non-technical editors. File-based content changes the editing experience by default, and that's real friction. So the question isn't, is Markdown good for editors? The question is, who edits content, how often, and with what expectations? This episode is not about solving that, just naming the trade-offs honestly. Those same trade-offs show up in multi-user environments. WordPress centralizes editorial control through roles, permissions, and the admin interface. Astro pushes editorial controls onto tools around the site: version control, CMS layers, and review processes. Smaller teams often gain clarity and predictability. Larger teams may need additional tooling to replace familiar controls. And again, this isn't better or worse, it's a structural shift. Your first reaction to the editing complexity might be to throw a CMS in front of Astro to make editing content easier and to give users a familiar interface. And in some cases, that's a great solution. But more often than not, it adds unnecessary complexity and begs the question, why not just use WordPress? That's a pretty advanced topic, though, and before diving into it, you need to have a grasp of how Astro is designed to work without all those extra layers. Don't worry, I have several videos planned for later in the series to discuss CMS systems that work with Astro, and we'll even touch on using WordPress as a headless CMS. Now, one of the reasons people have been talking about Astro and other file-based systems is because of AI. With WordPress, your site content and structure are both commingled and scattered. Some things live in the database, some things live in files, and often they live in both places and one takes precedence over the other. That's confusing for us, but it's even more confusing for AI. Astro's file-based explicit structure is easier for AI tools to read, reason about, and modify safely. Content, layouts, and components are predictable, and they can be inspected and changed without database interactions. And in practice, that helps most with maintenance, refactoring, accessibility improvements, and consistency checks. The benefits show up over time, not as a one-click generation. AI tools work beautifully with Astro, but they shouldn't be the sole reason to choose Astro over WordPress or another tool. Now, I want to mention e-commerce for a minute because it's another common pressure point. WordPress plus WooCommerce is popular and powerful. It's also complex, with a lot of business rules, relationships, and systems that need to talk to each other seamlessly. Astro is rarely the right choice for traditional e-commerce sites if you want to manage everything in one place. It tends to work better when e-commerce is an integration, not the core system. For example, Astro works great if you use a platform like Shopify, Ecwid, or Snipcart to manage your products, and Astro is the front end to display them. Astro also works well with hosted payment pages from platforms like Stripe, Lemon Squeezy, Paddle, and others. For many e-commerce heavy projects, though, it's a very easy choice to just stick with what you're already using. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, at this point, a few objections usually come up. This feels like more work. Yes, it is upfront. The payoff is later. Clients won't accept this. And sometimes that's true. That's a valid constraint. And why not just stick with WordPress? Sometimes that's the best decision. Choosing not to use Astro is often the responsible call. Remember, this is about making intentional choices, not chasing platforms or shiny objects. If this episode helped you feel more confident saying yes, no, or not yet, then it did its job. In the next episode, we're going to take a step back and ask a simpler question. If Astro produces static output, why not just build static sites the old-fashioned way? And what does Astro actually add? That's where things start to get interesting. Thanks again for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.